Frank's eyes narrowed as he watched the grainy footage on his supervisor's laptop. His jaw clenched, but the bravado he'd worn all day like a shield began to crack. "This," the supervisor said, pointing at the screen, "is unacceptable. You've managed to make yourself, this department, and this city look like a disgrace." Frank scoffed. Out of context, people always overreact to a video. She was. "Stop talking." The supervisor's voice was sharp, cutting through Frank's excuse. "Do you know who she is?" Frank frowned, the question throwing him off balance. "Some random lady who thinks she's better than everyone else?" "She's not just some lady," the supervisor said, his tone laced with incredulity. "That woman is Angela Carter, the newly appointed chief of police." Frank's stomach dropped. He felt the blood drain from his face as the words sank in. "No, that can't be right," he muttered, shaking his head. "It's right," his supervisor snapped. "And do you know what's worse? She's made it clear that accountability will be her top priority. You just handed her the perfect opportunity to start." Frank sat down heavily in the chair across from the desk, his mind racing. The smugness that had defined him all morning was gone, replaced by a dawning realization of the consequences barreling toward him. By the next morning, the story had grown into a media firestorm. Local and national outlets picked it up, each headline more damning than the last. The mayor's office issued a statement condemning the behavior, while activists rallied outside the precinct, demanding Frank's immediate suspension. Meanwhile, Angela Carter was at City Hall, standing behind a podium in a packed press conference. Calm and composed, she addressed the incident head-on. "This is not just about one officer's actions," she said, her voice firm but steady. "It's about a culture that allows this kind of behavior to go unchecked. As Chief of Police, I am committed to ensuring that every member of this department embodies the values of respect, professionalism, and accountability." She paused, letting her words resonate. Cameras flashed and reporters jotted down notes. "To the community of Birmingham, I want you to know this. No one is above the law, not even those sworn to enforce it." By the end of the week, Frank Dillard was placed on administrative leave, pending an investigation. But Angela Carter's actions didn't stop there. She announced sweeping reforms to the department, including mandatory bias training, a public complaint review board, and stricter penalties for officers who abused their power. Frank's arrogance had ignited a movement, and the changes that followed shook the city to its core. As for Angela, she didn't stop to celebrate the small victories. There was still too much work to be done, too many battles to fight. But as she walked through the precinct that afternoon, the officers stood a little straighter, their eyes filled with a mix of respect and fear. Justice wasn't just a concept anymore, it was a promise. And Angela Carter was here to make good on it. "What the hell is this?" the supervisor demanded, slamming a printed-out screenshot of a viral video on his desk. Frank stammered, "It's nothing, just some woman at the diner who got mouthy." "That woman," the supervisor interrupted, his voice rising, "is Alexandria Price, the new chief of police. She starts tomorrow." Frank's stomach dropped. His mind raced back to the diner, replaying the scene in horrifying detail. The spitting, the shouting, he felt a sinking dread. "Chief of police?" he croaked. "Yes, Frank," the supervisor snapped. "And thanks to you, the department is about to become front-page news for all the wrong reasons. Do you have any idea how bad this looks?" Frank tried to stammer out an excuse. I didn't know who she was. She was just being difficult." "Difficult?" The supervisor's fist hit the desk. "This isn't about her being difficult. This is career-ending." The station buzzed with tension. Word of Frank's blunder had spread like wildfire. His colleagues avoided eye contact, their hushed whispers echoing through the halls. Some looked at him with pity, others with thinly veiled disdain. Frank sat at his desk, slumped and restless, dreading what was to come. Meanwhile, across town in her newly appointed office, Alexandria Price sat watching the same video. Her expression was unreadable as she clicked pause and shut her laptop. The moment played over in her mind, the disrespect, the quiet rage she'd swallowed, and the ripple effect she was about to set in motion. The next morning, the Birmingham Police Department gathered in the main hall. Officers stood shoulder to shoulder, their chatter subdued by anticipation. The new chief of police was about to make her debut. When Alexandria Price entered the room, the energy shifted. She walked with calm authority, her navy suit as sharp as the glint in her eyes. The room fell silent as she approached the podium. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady and commanding. "I am Alexandria Price, your new chief of police. It's an honor to step into this role, but I won't sugarcoat things. We have work to do. My mission is clear: to rebuild trust, enforce accountability, and ensure that this department serves every citizen with dignity and respect." Her gaze swept the room, pausing briefly on Frank. He felt her eyes pierce through him, his heart pounding in his chest. "This badge," she continued, holding hers up, "represents service, integrity, and fairness. But those values don't just live in symbols, they live in you. If you wear this badge, you will embody those principles, or you will not wear it at all." The room was still as her words sank in. Alexandria stepped down from the podium, but the weight of her message lingered. Later that afternoon, Frank was summoned to her office. He walked in, his usual bravado nowhere to be found. Alexandria sat behind a sleek desk, her expression unreadable as she motioned for him to sit. "Officer Dillard," she began, her tone neutral but unyielding. "You know why you're here. I want to hear your side of yesterday's incident." Frank shifted uncomfortably, his palms sweating. "Chief, I didn't know who you were. If I had—" "Stop," she interrupted. "This isn't about who I am. It's about what you did. Would you have treated me differently if I weren't wearing a suit? If I were just another citizen?" Frank swallowed hard, struggling to find words. "That hesitation," she said, leaning forward, "is the problem. The values of this department cannot depend on who someone is or what they look like. What you did wasn't just disrespectful to me, it was a failure of the oath you swore to uphold." Frank looked down, shame flooding him. Alexandria continued, her voice steely. "There will be consequences for you and for the culture that allowed this to happen. Dismissed." As Frank left her office, her words echoed in his mind. He knew this wasn't over. His actions had opened the floodgates and change was coming, whether he liked it or not. Meanwhile, Alexandria turned back to the paperwork on her desk, her mind already racing with plans. This wasn't just about one officer's misconduct. It was about dismantling a culture of entitlement and replacing it with one of respect and accountability. By the end of her first week, the department was abuzz with new initiatives. Training programs were announced, oversight boards were formed, and policies were rewritten. The Birmingham Police Department was changing, and Alexandria Price was leading the charge. Chief Alexandria Price had made one thing abundantly clear: business as usual was over. Standing on the steps of the police headquarters, she addressed the press in front of a sea of flashing cameras. Reporters jostled for position, their microphones thrust forward, eager to capture her every word. "I've watched the video," Alexandria began, her voice unwavering. "What I saw was unacceptable, not just as the chief of police, but as a human being. This behavior does not reflect the values we must uphold, and it underscores the urgent need for reform." Her words rippled through Birmingham. She wasn't there to offer excuses or platitudes. She was there to lead. As the press conference ended, reporters clamored with questions. "Chief Price, do you plan to discipline the officer involved?" one asked. Alexandria met the reporter's gaze head-on. "Accountability is non-negotiable," she said firmly. "But I also believe in teaching moments. This department needs more than punishment. It needs structural change." The response sparked mixed reactions. Some were hopeful, inspired by her candidness and resolve. Others remained skeptical, hardened by years of promises that never materialized. Behind the scenes, Alexandria wasted no time. She rolled out mandatory de-escalation training, established a community oversight committee, and began a full review of the department's disciplinary policies. She wasn't just addressing this one incident, she was working to prevent the next one. Not everyone embraced the changes. "She's just trying to make a name for herself," one officer grumbled. "We've been doing this job for years, we don't need her telling us how to do it." Others, however, quietly acknowledged the truth. "She's right," one officer admitted during a meeting. "Things have to change. We can't keep pretending this stuff doesn't happen." Frank Dillard, the man at the center of the controversy, sat in silence during every meeting. His once cocky demeanor had vanished, replaced by a grim understanding of the chaos he'd unleashed. The irony of his actions, being the catalyst for change, wasn't lost on him. Over the following weeks, Alexandria immersed herself in the community. She met with leaders, activists, and everyday citizens, listening to their stories and frustrations. After one particularly heated town hall meeting, a young woman approached her, her voice trembling. "Chief Price," she said, "thank you for standing up for us. We've needed someone like you for a long time." Alexandria smiled, but her resolve only deepened. She wasn't doing this for applause or recognition. She was doing it because it was right. The story of Alexandria Price and Officer Dillard reverberated across Birmingham like a tidal wave. On one side, there was anger, a simmering frustration fueled by years of mistrust between the police and the community. On the other, there was cautious optimism, a fragile hope that finally real change might be possible. Local businesses hosted open forums where citizens shared their experiences with law enforcement. Churches became hubs for passionate discussions about justice and equality. Community leaders organized a march, and within days, hundreds of people gathered downtown. They carried signs that read "Accountability now" and "Respect is non-negotiable." For Frank Dillard, the fallout was deeply personal. His name was splashed across headlines, and his face became synonymous with the viral diner video. Trips to the grocery store were humiliating. People whispered behind his back, or worse, muttered loud enough for him to hear. "Guess he thought he was untouchable," one man said as Frank passed by, his face burning with shame. The public scorn wasn't the hardest part. The video had reached his family. His teenage daughter, Emma, stopped speaking to him, too ashamed to even look at him. His wife, Lisa, sat in silence most evenings, her disappointment unspoken but heavy in the air. One night, Lisa broke the silence. "Do you even understand what you've done?" she asked, her voice low but cutting. Frank didn't answer. What could he say? He had always prided himself on being tough, but now he felt exposed, his every flaw laid bare. Meanwhile, Alexandria pushed forward. She organized a meeting between the department and community leaders, and she insisted Frank attend. The room was tense, charged with emotion. A woman stood, her voice trembling with anger. "You expect us to trust you when your officers think it's okay to spit on people?" she demanded, glaring directly at Frank. Frank sat at the edge of his chair, staring at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. Alexandria stepped in. Her voice was calm but resolute. "We can't undo what's been done," she said, meeting the woman's gaze, "but we can choose what happens next. My commitment is to ensure this department earns your trust, not demands it." Her words resonated, softening the room's tension. In the weeks that followed, the seeds of change began to take root. Conversations between officers and citizens grew more open, and walls that had stood for years slowly began to crumble. For Frank, the journey was far from over, but for Alexandria and for Birmingham, it was a beginning, a new chapter, a second chance. But trust was not something easily rebuilt. It would take time, and for some, it might never come. By the end of the meeting, the air in the room felt lighter, not because resolution had been reached, but because dialogue had finally begun. Alexandria knew this was only the first step in a long, difficult journey. 2 weeks later, Alexandria called a departmental meeting that would prove to be a turning point. Officers filed into the conference room, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Frank Dillard sat near the back, trying to fade into the crowd. Alexandria stood at the front, commanding yet unassuming. She began without ceremony. "Accountability starts with each of us," she said. "It's not enough to wear the badge. We have to live up to what it represents, and when one of us fails, we all bear the weight." Her gaze shifted to Frank. "Officer Dillard, please stand." The room fell silent. Frank stood slowly, his face flushing with dread. "You've made choices that have damaged the trust between this department and the community we serve," she said. "But the real question is, what will you do now?" Frank opened his mouth, but no words came out. The silence grew heavy. "This isn't about public humiliation," Alexandria continued. "It's about growth. You have a choice: to learn, to change, to contribute to the solution, or to remain stuck in the cycle that brought us here." Frank nodded, his voice barely audible. "I want to do better." The room collectively exhaled, the tension easing slightly. Alexandria wasn't done. Officer Dillard will undergo additional training and serve a probationary period. He will also participate in community outreach programs to better understand the people we serve. This isn't just a punishment, it's an opportunity to prove that change is possible. Reactions in the room were mixed. Some officers bristled, believing she was being too lenient. Others nodded, recognizing the fairness of her approach. Frank left the meeting with a heavy heart, but for the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was his chance to redeem himself, not just in the eyes of others, but in his own. Over the next few months, the Birmingham Police Department began to change. Alexandria's reforms weren't just theoretical, they were happening. Officers attended workshops led by community leaders, where they heard first-hand accounts of the fear and mistrust many residents felt toward law enforcement. Resistance was common at first, but the power of those stories began to shift perspectives. For Frank, the road to redemption was especially grueling. As part of his probation, he was assigned to work with a local youth program in a predominantly black neighborhood. On his first day, he felt completely out of place in his uniform. "Why is he here?" a boy whispered loudly to another. Frank pretended not to hear, but the comment hit him like a gut punch. It was a stark reminder of the mistrust he had helped perpetuate. But slowly, things began to shift. He started talking to the kids, helping them with homework, and even joining their basketball games. It wasn't easy, and he wasn't perfect, but he was trying, and they could see that. One day, after a game, a young girl named Tasha approached him. "Are you really trying to change?" she asked, her big brown eyes skeptical. Frank knelt to her level. "I'm trying my best," he said honestly. She studied him for a moment before nodding. "Good, 'cause we're watching you." Her words stayed with him, a constant reminder of the responsibility he now carried. Meanwhile, Alexandria pressed forward with her outreach efforts. She met regularly with community leaders to ensure their voices were heard in departmental policies. At one meeting, an elder named Mr. Coleman pulled her aside. "Chief Price," he said, his voice weary but kind, "I've been around long enough to see a lot of promises come and go, but you're the first person who's ever made me believe things could actually change." Alexandria smiled, but her reply was serious. "I appreciate that, Mr. Coleman, but this isn't about belief. It's about action, and it's going to take all of us." The community began to respond. Complaints against the police dropped. Residents started attending public safety meetings, finally feeling like their concerns mattered. The department wasn't perfect. It still had a long way to go. But the changes were real, and they were making a difference. Frank, too, was changing. He spent hours volunteering, listening, and learning. The children he worked with began to warm to him, and their families slowly followed suit. One evening, as he left the youth center, a boy ran up to him. "Hey, Officer Frank," he called. "You're not as bad as I thought." Frank laughed, the first genuine laugh he'd had in months. "Thanks, I think." For Frank, redemption wasn't about erasing his mistakes. It was about owning them and proving he could do better. And for Alexandria, the work continued. Because true change wasn't about one officer, one department, or even one city. It was about creating a system where trust wasn't a fragile hope, but a shared foundation. One evening, as Frank Dillard walked to his car after a long day at the youth center, a man approached him. "Officer Dillard," the man said. Frank turned, cautious. "Yeah?" "I saw the video," the man continued. "I was furious, but I've been watching you these past few months. You've changed. I respect that." Frank paused, unsure how to respond. Finally, he nodded and muttered, "Thank you." As he drove home that night, he realized he felt something he hadn't in a long time. Pride. Not in himself, but in the work he was doing to make amends. Months turned into a year, and Birmingham was no longer the same city. The scars of the past remained, but the seeds of change planted by Chief Alexandria Price had begun to bloom. The community felt it, the department felt it, and even Frank Dillard, once the face of disrespect, felt it. On the anniversary of her appointment, Alexandria held a public forum in the heart of the city. The room was packed with officers, community leaders, families, and curious citizens, all gathered to reflect on the journey so far. Standing at the podium, Alexandria looked out at the crowd. She thought of the challenges, the resistance, and the victories, big and small. "When I started this job," she began, "I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I also knew it was necessary. What we've accomplished this past year isn't just about a single department or a single incident. It's about a community coming together to demand better and to hold ourselves accountable. The audience applauded, their response filled with hope and gratitude. She paused, her tone softening. I want to recognize someone in particular. Officer Frank Dillard, please stand. All eyes turned to Frank. Slowly he rose, visibly uncomfortable but resolute. Officer Dillard has taken a hard road this past year, Alexandria said. He's faced his mistakes, learned from them, and worked tirelessly to rebuild the trust he once shattered. That's not an easy thing to do. It takes humility, courage, and an unwavering commitment to do better. Frank's face turned crimson, but he managed a small smile as the room erupted in applause. It wasn't forgiveness. It was an acknowledgement of growth. After the forum, Frank approached Alexandria. Chief, he said, his voice steady but humble, I don't deserve your kindness, but I promise I'll keep earning it. Alexandria nodded. It's not about deserving, Frank. It's about doing the work. Keep at it. As the night ended, Alexandria took a moment to reflect. Change was never easy, and the road ahead was still long. But tonight she saw a glimpse of what was possible when people chose accountability over pride, humility over ego, and action over excuses. In a world often divided by prejudice and anger, this small corner of Birmingham had proven that transformation was possible, not through perfection, but through persistence. And so, the story of Alexandria Price and Frank Dillard became more than just a headline. It became a lesson, a reminder that true change starts with a single step and the courage to keep moving forward, no matter how steep the path. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring content. Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Thank you for being part of the Guildmaster Stories community. See you soon.